So it should, is everybody seeing that it's got the little red dot that says it's recording and all that fun stuff? Okay, so with that said, this is an informational meeting, by the way, just regarding what's going on with the potential world of real estate. And I'm going to read the right to know law meeting checklist. By the way, if you don't already know me, you may see me running around town. I'm literally running around town. My name is Jeff Hyatt. I'm the chairman of the Newington Economic Development Committee, and due to the COVID-19 coronavirus crisis, in accordance with Governor Sununu's Emergency Order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this committee is authorized to meet electronically. Now, this is related, there is no physical location to observe this presentation today and listen contemporaneously to the meeting, which was authorized pursuant to this to the governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, this is to confirm that we are providing public access to this informational meeting by telephone with additional access via Zoom. We're utilizing the Zoom platform for electronic meeting. All members of the committee have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the Zoom platform with the chat feature. And then the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting through dialing the telephone numbers provided or by inserting the website address on the agenda. Providing public notice of the necessary information for accessing this meeting, we previously gave notice to the public how to use the Zoom, and instructions are provided on the Town of Newington's website at www.newington.nh.us. We're providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anybody has a problem, please call 603-436-7640, which is the town hall number. Adjourning the meeting, if the public is unable to access the meeting, in the event that the public is unable to access the meeting, we will adjourn the meeting and have it rescheduled to a future date. I'm sure that will not be happening here because everybody seems to be rocking and rolling. Please note that all votes, and there probably won't be any votes here on this today, but that's part of what we're getting to look at. So with that said, we're going to just talk here quickly. Let's see, I've covered all of this. All right, I think we're good to go on our details there. So with that said, we are recording, so that is a good thing. And this is, again, just an informational meeting. Christian Stallkamp has experience with the potential for mixed use redevelopment in various communities, and he's going to give us a little presentation on that so that the community can just better understand what the possibilities are and how things might potentially work. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Christian Stallkamp, and we'll go from there. And we will adjourn, if not prior, right at 11 o'clock.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeff, and thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. And interesting opportunity to be able to chat about potential mixed use and also, commercial real estate in general around here in the Seacoast. And before I start, maybe a little introduction about who I am. And so I live here in Portsmouth. I've been working commercial real estate for the past 14 years here in the Seacoast, servicing New Hampshire, Maine, and Mass, and essentially northern Mass, but primarily here in the Seacoast of New Hampshire. Married with three girls, 12, 10, and 8, so they keep me busy. But beyond that is focusing here on the Seacoast. And the company that I work for is the Bowles Company, and the Bowles Company has been around since 1975, based up in Portland. Expanded down into the Portsmouth or the Seacoast area about 18 years ago. And our primary focus is on commercial, mixed use. We do not focus on residential, individual units. We do multifamily sales, but primarily our focus is office, retail, industrial, mixed use. So for the past 14 years, that's all I've been doing, running around. I've been in front of the town meetings with tenants or potential buyers, and so we'd say that we're very familiar with this market as it relates to the Seacoast and Newington. And to give a little background of the experience working in Newington for the past, I'd say 15 years, we've been working with Erstelt Biddle, which, as you know, is a owner of property in Newington. Originally was a mixed use property, but that's the 14-acre site, which had the TGIF in the front, Party City, office, Savers in the back, just to kind of give them, everybody's familiar with that site. So we've been working with them for quite a long time. We've been doing the leasing, primarily Erstelt Biddle, more grocery anchored in terms of the properties that they own. So this one's a little bit outside of their wheelhouse, but it's been a great property and for them. And what's interesting to kind of go into the conversation, and please, if anyone has any questions or anything like that, please feel free to jump in, ask any questions. I think there's the ability to write text as well on Zoom, and I'll do my best to try to see that. But yeah, please interrupt if you have any questions, because I want to make sure that any questions are answered.
On that note, if I notice a chat come in, I'll
I'll do my best to see it too. My only goal here is not to turn myself into a cat. I don't know if you guys saw that yesterday, but there was a attorney and a judge, and the attorney was messing around with the Zoom, and he turned his some sort of chat feature on, and his face turned into a cat. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but it was pretty funny.
Not the time to be playing with your computer, I would assume.
No. So,
Christian, just one thing, I did enable you if you want to share the screen at all. You're more than
okay.
welcome.
I have not. I've got some other stuff on my screens, but my thought was to kind of try to keep an open dialogue, and if you have any questions to give me a shout. But for the most part, in terms of the conversation, is to keep it flowing and answer any questions that you may have. So, looking at the property, working with Erstelt Biddle, what we've noticed over the years is a change, and that change has been a trend from national tenants to more regional tenants, and there have been challenges trying to get tenants into those spaces. So as you remember way back, Outback Steakhouse was over there, and TGIF. And so when the lack of traffic, or when traffic was starting to wane at the mall, those groups started pulling out of those restaurant locations. And we've seen it elsewhere, along Woodbury Ave as well in Newington. So what we've been doing is trying to market and get other tenants into that space. The challenges have been the traffic and the ability to draw those nationals back into those spaces. So what we're finding is, due to that, there's been a decrease in, trying to re-let those spaces. So over time, the ultimate goal then was to try to figure out, all right, what would be the game plan for that property? And then, so at this point, they've actually decided to sell their property, and we're actually currently marketing. So I thought it'd be interesting in terms of the conversation to kind of go through the process of how we were looking at this and how we look at other properties in terms of establishing a highest and best use. So one of the things that, when they had come to us in terms of marketing, was to try to figure out essentially, what is the highest and best use? And this is what goes into, I guess, the combination of looking at it as mixed use. So we looked at other projects around the surrounding community in the Seacoast, trying to ascertain, highest and best use, looking at projects, and then switching that over into that particular lot. we thought mixed use may be an opportunity, but obviously due to zoning, and it is not appropriately zoned for mixed use, then that has been one of the challenges. There's a lot of groups that would be focused into trying to look at this as a redevelopment play, but if the zoning isn't there, it is more of a challenge to be able to market the property when the zoning isn't there, based on the timeline, if somebody try to bring something in front of the town. So what that did in fact then is change kind of the value or the outlook, because what we were looking at is trying to apply similar sales or comps associated with mixed use into that location. And if the zoning's not there, then the pricing will be there. And there's been some great success stories, you know, within the surrounding seacoast for mixed use development. A good example of that's the Southgate Mall over in Portsmouth off of Lafayette Road. If you can remember, it's kind of a challenging mall, a little bit off the beaten path. And at that point in time, Waterstone came in and redeveloped it, and then also looked into increasing the footprints. And if you'll see a Chipotle in there now, a wide range of uses. And in the back of the property, there's residential. So that has been a truly successful project, and you can see it looking at the assessed values associated with that project. But by marketing this project here in Newington, we can't necessarily apply those same points to Newington Park because the zoning isn't there. So that is affecting the value, I would say, associated with, you know, this project, bringing it to market. So that's one thing I wanted to point out in terms of you know, new and interesting, you know, uses that are there. One thing to also look at, our firm also has had experience in mall conversions, and it's an interesting conversation to look at, as you know, similar to the report that Jeff had sent over to me that the town of Newington has looked at. And there's just a wide range of uses. It's an interesting time right now within the industry, specifically for these larger malls, you know, what to do with. And we worked on a project up in Lewiston, Maine. It was a conversion over to industrial, and it didn't come without its challenges. It was a success. Some of the things that you wouldn't necessarily think about ended up being the challenge. One is the slabs associated with these properties couldn't necessarily support that of manufacturing. So manufacturers look for bringing in this heavy machinery, and if you can't put that heavy machinery on the slabs, you've got to either rip up that slab and pour a new slab, or you're limiting your use to that of warehouse. So in this particular case, that was what happened. They repositioned it into warehousing, and were able to put loading docks on the back of it, and then expanded the footprints out into the parking lot. As we all know, these malls have a huge sea of parking. But one thing to kind of point out, though, on the industrial side, if you're looking at, you know, maximizing the site for its highest and best use, if you're going industrial, you're typically going over, you know, a large building with the ability for loading. You don't have as much parking for office, but then that will change in terms of what the assessed value will be and what would happen in terms of what the value that Newington would then see in terms of pricing. So just a data point to look at industrial versus mixed use in terms of assessed value. This morning I pulled some assessed values in terms of looking at Southgate, which is the property I talked to before, and then also looking at other industrial properties to see, you know, looking at a comparison, you know, what does that look like? And just some things to think about in the conversation if you're looking to consider mixed use. One, you know, looking at the Viridian, it's assessed now at $50 million with a total square footage of 287,000 square feet. So what they've done is increased the density and gone up with the residential component back, which was essentially adding 115,000 square feet to the site. the total site's around 18, 19 acres. So their tax, if I then applied it to the Newington tax rate, let's say it was assessed at 50 million, that would equate to roughly 475,000 a year, which is $1.66 per square foot. And if you have questions on this, let me know. I just thought I'd try to figure out, throw some numbers out there to look at, comparison of, mixed use projects versus, industrial. I think a lot of people are looking at, the potential is converting it to industrial. Maybe that's the case, but I just thought we'd look in terms of comparison because we have seen these types of conversions in the past. Another example would be Heritage Ave in Portsmouth. That's an industrial. All along that stretch on Heritage Ave is industrial. So I went and calculated essentially 18 acres to look at it as to Southgate, 18 acres, and how much square footage could be on that if it was industrial. Essentially on that 18 acres, there's 150,000 square feet, and with an assessed value of 11 million. So it's essentially the same lot size, totally different square footage, and totally different assessed value. With that 11 million, and if I'm applying it to the Newington tax rate of 950, you're getting 112,000 a year or 74 cents a foot. So just in terms of comparison to see what mixed use could bring versus industrial, granted, the Fox Run, there is a sea of parking that you could expand to, and that would be something maybe to have the conversation as well. But right now, the Fox Run Mall's assessed as 46 million on 31 acres, which gives you roughly 440,000 of tax revenue, or $1.86. Comparable in the town of Newington, for example, at Nimble Hill, there's 125,000 square feet, which is assessed at over $6 million, which gives it roughly then annual taxes of 60,000 or 48 cents a foot. So I think these are interesting to look at in terms of, how do you look to reposition this area? Because it is so unique. It is such a, that's one of the reasons why they I assume just placed them all there, is because its proximity to this huge trade area. So industrial would be interested, and also other types of uses. So it's interesting to figure out, what to look at. And in my mind, what we're seeing right now in the market is a demand, and it's a demand for housing. And I can't tell you how many times that we're talking to office or industrial owners of companies that are having trouble getting employees because of the high cost of living in this seacoast. So we've seen companies actually move. I had a great company that I'd worked with for quite some time, was an office user, and they worked in the medical billing area, and they decided to move actually to Texas because they had such a hard time trying to find employees. And the issue was that everybody, was having to live in such a further distance that it was a challenge getting employees to come into this market. And we're seeing that across the board too. And it's a challenge not only in this community but other communities, but being able to have some type of affordable housing for groups to be able to continue to amplify the workforce within the market. So that's what we're seeing at the moment in terms of demand. And I think that one thing to look at too is, due to COVID, office has been more of a challenge right now. We haven't seen a weakness in pricing necessarily for office pricing, but we have seen a weakness in demand. And if I could look at the crystal ball, I'd say that the office environment right now is going to be a little bit different. 5 years from now, I think a lot of companies are really taking a hard look at some type of blended at home and at the office model, where companies are shrinking their footprints. As an example, This year I did a deal. It was a company that went from 25,000 square feet of office, and they shrunk it down to 6,000 square feet, where they're doing just that, a model of work from home and coming in the office. So we'll see how the office side flushes out. Industrial continues to be a big demand in our market, especially the last mile services. And we've got a great market survey that I'll make sure to forward off to everyone here, and you can include on your website. But we do a painstaking analysis of the Seacoast market of the office and industrial of 10,000 square feet greater, considered Class A product, and that will be able to give you kind of a good scale and scope in terms of what the vacancy rates are looking like in the Seacoast. And we also look to try to make some predictions, and we'll see how that will pan out over the year. But if you are interested in that, I'll make sure to send that along and include it on your website. We do drive the market and call all the owners, so it's a painstaking process, but it's a great exercise for us to be able to, really know and understand the market. So, with that, I thought I'd just try to see if there's any questions. I just wanted to just paint broad strokes in terms of, what we're seeing here in this market and potential for mixed use and the demand, and hopefully been able to give a good little snapshot of that.
Christian, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I've just I'll ask just a few questions on some things that you brought up, and maybe you can, I know you've said some of it already, so if you don't mind repeating it,
yeah,
or just putting a little more of a focus spotlight on it. You brought up the big box. Obviously, that might be a reference to Amazon and their last mile distribution kind of facility. And in theory, the mall could be a nice, reuse in that kind of a scenario, because it's big, it's already there, easy to get in. Probably Amazon and Co. could buy it at a reasonable price. I think you mentioned, what did you say the mall is currently valued at in our tax base?
Then this is just the Fox Run. I didn't include the Macy's, so just Fox Run alone is 46 million.
Oh, just Fox Run.
Yeah.
So that doesn't include the Macy's, and then what doesn't include Seritage, and what does that include and not include?
So it includes, it does not include the Macy's box. It does not include the Sears box. So that would be it.
So, but everything else is included in that 46.
Correct. So about 150,000 square feet
is included in that 46.
Correct.
But you throw in those other two boxes, those other two elements of that property, theoretically, roughly, it might double that number then.
Correct.
If you've got two of the boxes, but not the other two, then roughly we're looking at about 90 to 100 mil of value-ish. Fair?
Well, that's correct. And that's what it's currently assessed at. Now, as these things go dark, that's where these companies start saying, hey, this value isn't here anymore. We've seen this play out in large boxes throughout communities such as Walmart, and it becomes an added question of, is this the value truly now? Because they have something like this listed on the market, they're not getting any takers. So that could potentially be an issue down the road. And if these, stay dark, they may be knocking on the door asking for a reassessment.
Good point. So if we're going with, it's about 90 to 100 mil-ish of value today as a retail, theoretically as a retail facility. And you were, so what, can you remind me, was it 475,000 at 46 mil?
It was for the Southgate you're looking at?
No, I think you would, or maybe I'm wrong, but what is the tax revenue from?
Oh, sorry. From just Fox Run alone is 443,000.
443, so that's double that, we're talking 880K. So the town of Newington right now is theoretically getting 880K as it sits with the valuations there. What is the rent rate for a typical retail per square foot price? What would that roughly be?
Yeah, and that's the hard thing. It would vary, right? And for example, if we're looking at the pad sites out front, for a restaurant, that rate's going to be a little bit different than that if it was in line. So it would vary. It would vary.
Okay. You think it might be 15, 16 bucks a square foot, maybe?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, if you want to look at it to average it out, but yeah, it would all vary, and it also varies depending upon the square footage associated with that tenant. So that's a tough question to kind of, we'd have to look at a more specific data set to give you that number. If it's inline retail in our market, or if it's big box, or also if it's grocery anchored with retail along the side. So that it all will vary.
Sure. Okay. But I think I had seen one of your reports at one point, and I think it was in the 15 to. So I'm trying to get an understanding of what the retail per square foot rate is, which is giving us that
Correct.
$880,000 tax revenue. What would an industrial use, if that got converted, for instance, to let's say an Amazon facility, what do you
Right.
think they would be paying for an industrial use there?
So that's a good question. I mean, a lot of it depends upon the functionality of that building and if they can be able to use that. So historically, in our market has been trending higher in terms of on a per square foot rent. But at the end of the day, tenants are in that 650 to 675, and for that's existing product of industrial, that's not new construction. Let's just stay that range. But new construction, or spaces that are renovated could go in that $10 range in the Seacoast, and that's along the 95 corridor. As things go outside of the 95 corridor or off the beaten path, I would say that those rents start to go down. So yeah, the industrial rents would typically then be a lot less, and then in addition, as you increase the square footage, those rents would typically be a little bit less as well. So the market right now for industrial is high bay, and in that high bay, we're talking about ceiling heights. The trend is for higher ceiling heights, and a lot of our industrial product in our market is actually pretty old product that doesn't necessarily meet what a lot of these new tenants are looking for. So we've got anywhere from 16 to 20 foot clear. Tenants are now looking for minimum 28 to 34 foot clear, and that's their ceiling heights. So there's been efficiencies in the racking systems and the machines to be able to put these pallets into the racking systems. And so essentially tenants are going up, and then their racking systems are shrinking to take advantage of that square footage. So that would be an interesting analysis, looking at the existing buildings. How are those laid out? Are there a lot of columns? And that would then dictate what an end user would be able to pay for. But typically something like that would be in that lower range than the retail.
I would think so. And I don't have an eye for this, in terms of height, but I'm just thinking of walking into the mall. Does the mall, Fox Run, just on that note, does it have anywhere near 35 foot clear or no?
You know what? I haven't been in there in a while. I don't believe so, but maybe somebody, you guys could help me out here.
Yeah,
they usually have drop ceilings down too, so sometimes you can benefit by taking those ceilings out and increasing another 1.5 feet, 2 feet. But I don't believe they do. But again, I would think they were probably more in the 18 foot clear, but that would just be a guess.
Okay. What might a developer do to help mitigate concerns about overcrowding, in terms of potentially You know, I know one of the concerns that most of us in town have would be concern about the school and how that might be affected if all of a sudden there were 100 and what was it you said over at the place in Portsmouth there, was it 115 units?
Yeah, roughly. And how would that affect the school system? I think
Well, how do you, is there a way to?
you could look to, so there are ways to look at, you know, the unit mix associated with it in terms of bedrooms. And that would be one way to look at it in terms of looking at more studios and in one bedrooms. And that would also then bring the price down in terms of on a monthly price to be able to, you know, become more affordable to those out there in the Seacoast. Because I think that's one thing. I mean, looking at, you know, residential homes versus apartments. I mean, there's just a lack of supply on the residential homes, and they're very, you know, very expensive to buy here in the Seacoast. And so, you know, studio or one bedroom, you know, no matter how you look at it, it's still going to be cheaper than getting into, you know, a brand new house in Newington or Portsmouth. So yeah, that's one way to look at it. In terms of an impact on the systems, I think that it's, you know, going to be taken care of based upon, and again, somebody would have to crunch this, but typically it would be based upon that new assessed value to be able to help with any additional burdens on the police or fire or the school systems.
Well, Christian, do you have anything else that you want to add, or do any other attendees? I haven't noticed any chats pop up. So if anyone else would like to comment, ask questions, we've got a good resource here. If not, if anyone wants to chat or turn on their camera and wave at me or do something to communicate. So Mike,
Yeah,
thanks, Mike. We got Mike on there. Thanks.
You can count on me to talk.
All right, we've got. It looks like I think Chris is on here. Is he? Chris, are you going to ask questions, or do you have anything to say?
I have a question versus housing costs. You talk about affordable housing for employers on it, and yet the development that you mentioned, and I think housing monthly costs are $2,500 to $3,500 a month, and not many employees can afford that.
No, yes, I would agree that is not, you know, affordable housing, but it's housing, and there's just a lot of demand for people to move into these markets. You know, I think there's different definitions for affordable versus workforce. And those are, you know, workforce is addressed by the state in terms of definition affordable as well. But yeah, I guess I look at it as, you know, if I was younger moving into a town and I wanted to live in that town, where can I live? And when you know, I'm not originally from this area. I've only been here for maybe about 16 years. And when we moved here, there's just a lack of supply of apartments. I lived in a converted garage for quite some time. And I think that I knew I wanted to live here. I knew I wanted to raise a family, but there really, you know, there wasn't an option, but we figured out how to make it work based on the pricing that was available. So I think more product will help bring more people into this market.
And Jeff, I have a second question, if that's.
Oh, please. That's what it's here for.
You've talked about higher bays for buildings. What about multi-floors, 4, 5, 6 stories for hotels or offices or things like that? How does that value come into play?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question in terms of value, and this goes back to, you know, highest and best use when looking at a property. You know, if you can increase the density, then, you know, that's what developers are going to be looking for. So on an office building, it brings up issues in terms of parking ratios. So typically in our market, this was pre-COVID, office developers are going to be looking to increase the parking ratio of 6 per thousand, 7 per thousand square feet, 7 spaces per thousand square feet. So you can only maximize that floor plate so much in terms of the parking. But yes, going up is a way to make the sites work and the highest and best use. For hotels, that's the other goal is to go up and be able to maximize the site.
It looks like Mike has a question, or he's waving to say hello to me or goodbye. Mike, do you have a question?
I've got a question. Christian, you mentioned the studies that you said you could share with us. You'll be pleased to know that they've actually, your latest study actually was already shared with us.
Oh, great.
By Alicia Bisconi, who represents the adjoining property, is on our committee. So she brought your study to our last meeting, and we were surprised to see on that study that Newington office, the study dealt with office and industrial. And the study showed that Newington office had a very high vacancy rate in comparison to basically the rest of the seacoast. It was like at 23% or something like that. And we had questions, or we were trying to figure out how that resulted, or what are the drivers of that? Because obviously office is a permitted use in these areas, and it clearly it would be something that can be done as of right. And yet if we got a 23% rate with what appeared to be a relatively small, it's like something like 93,000 square feet. I think.
Yes, in total in the office market. And I think a lot of why that vacancy rate looks like that is just think of the data set that we're working with as opposed to like a Boston market. It's a very small set, right, in the Seacoast. And when looking at Newington, the new product that came online over at Arboretum, and so there's available space over there, and I think that's where that big bump is.
Oh, okay. Well, that explains it. We had ruled that out because you had a separate category for fees, and the Arboretum office, of course, is on fees. The town.
Oh yes, yeah. You know what? You're right. Yeah.
Any tax revenue from that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Let me just try to pull it up here. Yeah. We've got 27,000 square feet that's vacant. The old Bean Farm is one, so that's older product, and then West Park Drive and Newington Park, which is what we're marketing as well. So that's the space that became available there.
Okay.
So you're correct. Sorry, that's
no. I mean, I'm not trying to be correct. We're just trying to, puzzle through this. So basically, we, despite the fact that we have a lot of land zoned for office, we really don't have that much office. So if there is some vacancies, as you've described them, that really pumps the vacancy rate up, I guess.
Yeah, and what's interesting too with office is that what we see with these larger groups that are coming into this market is that the Peace Trayport carries with it some sort of badge or credibility, and office tenants will tend to want to gravitate near each other, and versus going out alone on a separate parcel. So I think that the Trayport lends itself to that type of office development. The only downside is, as everyone knows, the developers tend to it doesn't excite every developer, just the fact that it's on ground rents
Yeah.
versus actual holding title. So in the office market itself, you know, the spaces that could potentially become available or for future ground up, it's going to have to be, you know, a specific tenant like a Northeast Credit Union that wants to have a showcase that to move headquarters to a prominent location.
Right. Thank you, Christian.
Any other comments out there or questions for Christian before we lose him on this event?
Yes, Jeff, I have a question.
Fire away.
Christian, I'm interested to hear what you have learned in terms of the number of children, school age, that are coming out of these housing projects from mixed use development. Do you have a handle on that?
I don't, meaning, you know, what's the ratio of families in these mixed use developments?
Yes.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't have those data points.
I just say that all those data points are well answered and covered in the study the planning board and the board of selectmen commenced. I mean, there's all kinds of information in there validated, including for the Viridian project in Southgate that Christian referenced, that tells us that the unit type drives the number of children, and that you know, I think, you know, we have the ratios. We actually discussed them at the tent meeting.
Our tent meeting was a good one, and it was nice that it was pulled together by the planning board and their report that both the planning board backed and also the selectmen had that report as well. So that is available on the website if you want to download it. I think it's like 220 or 250 pages. It's a monster, but you can just look at the data points on those particular items. But it was not, in my opinion, it was not an overwhelming number of kids per unit, because the unit mix within the building will drive if the tenants are, you know, going to be bringing kids into that, because they're typically, as I understand it, studios and one bedrooms, possibly some twos in there too. But anyway.
Yeah, and it goes back to, you know, from what I can see or from the people that I know that live over there, they're working professionals here in the Seacoast, and you know, similar to when I tried to move into this town. I mean, it was almost like a word of mouth to try to find an apartment. And you know, I think you want to try to look at the workforce, and I'm not saying affordable or workforce housing, but just general supply in terms of being able to live and work in a community, to me, is huge. And you can see the explosion of this actually down the road in Dover. You know, other mixed use developments that are going up, and you're seeing a push because groups are priced out of Portsmouth up into Dover, and the companies are going to follow. And that's a concern, is that, you know, as you know, pricing increases here, that companies are going to just pick up and, you know, head north or head to another state.
Jeff, do you mind if I asked a question of Christian while we got him on the phone? This is Brandon.
Hey, Brandon, go right ahead.
Right, yeah.
Christian, one other thing that came out of your little your New Hampshire office market snapshot that I saw was the fact that it seems like the communities surrounding us have total square footage in the office segment that's relatively substantial, whether that's Dover or Portsmouth, just people that surround us. And we have a very small, and they have low vacancy numbers. You know, some in Dover, they have them at 3%. Is that something we should be looking at also, is how to, I mean, clearly there's a demand surrounding us and we're the only ones that don't have the inventory. Is that something that we should be looking at? Is that a good place to be?
In terms of trying to spur development for office in this area?
Sure.
Yeah. I think that with COVID, I would be hesitant to push hard on office development now until things are kind of fleshed out to see where we are. Not to say that there aren't companies, and that's our hope, is that companies, you know, in downtown Boston are going to want to come up in this market. But I think the option is there. I think that I think tenants and or companies are going to find existing options that they may be able to jump into that are existing versus ground up. And that's been a serious issue with our ground up development here in our market, is just the costs associated with new construction and being able to support the rents that the market can bear. And we see that on the industrial and we see that on the office. So, and the cost of construction has gone up significantly. Mixed use is one thing that can support the numbers for ground up. We have seen very little spec come on the market for office or industrial, and it all comes down to the cost to build it is significant to where the tenants get gun shy in terms of wanting to pay those numbers. So that's been historic for our market for quite some time, and it gets even worse as you go further outside the 95 corridor, where Dover and Rochester have created programs, because they keep losing out on deals, where they actually buy the land, build the building, lease it back to the tenant, and then sell it to that tenant in 5 years, because you can't build the building and the land and get it appraised, because the values, you know, in those other markets are less. And so any sort of owner user would have to come up with a significant amount of funds to be able to cover the nut that the lender would want to allow them to give them for new construction. So it's tough. You know, office is going to be a challenge too for ground up, unless, you know, and that's part of the issue that we're finding.
So then do your numbers here, do they kind of reflect the mid 2020, or was it the end of 2020, or do you expect them to be much different for 2021? Vacancy percentages?
I do. I think, you know, we're starting to see more sublease space on the market. As more product comes on the market, I think that you're going to start to see a little bit of weakness on pricing for the office side. But only time will tell. I mean, for right now, if you look at the industrial side, everything is so tight that it's pushing up the prices on industrial. So I remember, 7-10 years ago, you used to do a search for a tenant, trying to get them to move out of Mass or come to this market, and there'd be, at least five options of 24,000 square foot industrial spaces for them to look at, and they had their pick. Now there's just literally nothing for them to choose.
Well, Christian, looks like Chris Cross has a question for you.
Everybody else had a chance. Christian, thank you. When you're talking about housing market, you mentioned studios or 1 bedrooms. What about 2 and 3 bedrooms as far as economical and demand?
I would, and I don't have the data points for it, but I don't have any in terms of demand. 2 bedrooms versus, I don't.
Understand, no problem.
Yeah, I think if you look across the board at the different projects, though, you'll see offerings, but I think that there's been more demand for the studio and 1 bedrooms.
Okay.
If you were to say which has more, I would say the studio and 1 bedrooms. And again, it goes back to, the young professional trying to work and live in the same area.
Right. once you get kids, you can't afford the apartment rents that it takes in this area.
Then you try to find the home. Yeah.
That's right. The other question I had is a areas the size of Newington Mall, or even the property you're developing. So because of availability of funds and predictability of return, is likely that those properties are more apt to be broken up and developed individually to make it a smaller chunk.
That's interesting. Yeah, with this particular project, and it really takes, reaching out and connecting with different developers, because everybody looks at it differently. There's not a formula that to go one way or another, but just because of the different options. I mean, it's not just obviously it can't be a mixed use play because there's no zoning for it. So everybody's looking at this differently in terms of what to do to either, rebrand and reposition the retail center, or to bring in development into it. And everybody that we've been talking to has different ideas associated with it. They realize one thing is that it's an amazing location here in the Seacoast, and it's a unique opportunity to own this parcel, quite frankly. So everybody's got a different view.
One of the reasons I asked is it's not just the zoning, but also we have a requirement that of only one principal building or use per parcel. And you're not going to build a multi-family the entire length of the parcel you have for sale, and definitely not the size of the mall. So that would be something else that would have to change to allow this type of mixed use effort. Yeah,
you see it at the Southgate. Just pulling up the data for today's call was, and you'll see it too. I mean, you can separate it into land condos, and that's where Sears, has their own property, and also with Southgate, their individual units that they've broken out, and that also helps the developer too in terms of financing or selling. So.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you very much. I appreciate your. Perhaps one last comment, if nobody else has, is as much as we look at any kind of development or light industry or office, it is no comparison to the value of utility-based land. And while that may be diminishing, that's half our tax base currently, and there's no way that we can make up in the entire rest of the development that kind of loss that's going to come in the utility area. Is that true?
Utility meaning?
Our utility
Power
values is
the power plants.
probably 7 or 8 times the value of the commercial area.
Right.
So, even if we double the assessed value that we have on the malls now, it hardly compare. It's small comparison to what a change in the utility will be as far as our tax base.
Right.
That's a great point, and that's always been one of my concerns, is that, if we, like you said, Chris, if that's going to just die on us, or the values are going to continue to drop like they have been, then I don't think it, in my mind, it's probably not a great idea to, put our head in the sand and say, okay, well, we're just going to ignore anything else we can do on the other parcels around town. So in my mind, it makes sense to do what we can, where we can, and possibly, deal with, and, if the utility companies' values drop, they drop. I mean, like you said, Chris, we're not bringing that back to life on our own. So
it'd be nice to have some heavy industry or something that compare to that, but those are hard to find.
Absolutely. Well,
yeah,
we're running low here on time. I appreciate everybody's time and efforts. And Christian, thank you for presenting. And we'll go ahead and sign off now. And again,
Great.
Thank you very much, Christian.
Yeah, thanks for having me. If anybody has any other questions, I'm sure you can track me down. Feel free to shoot me an email or anything like that. But again, thanks for having me, and appreciate the conversation.
when we're done with this, Christian, if you don't mind, go ahead and send me that and that document you were talking about, and we'll get it posted as
Yeah.
kind of associated with this presentation.
Okay, great.
Okay, thanks, everyone. Have a great
Thank you.
day.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Bye, Chris. See you, Mike.